What is up, BookTube? It is Monty, and today I am back again, once again. Finally, it's been a minute. I know. I'm sorry. I apologize. My bad. But I'm here today to talk with all of you about some of the things that I've been reading over the past couple of months. So July and then August. So we're gonna get into it. I will say, I'm gonna grab my phone here so I can start scrolling through my Goodreads. If you want more in-depth thoughts, last month in August, I was daily vlogging for the patrons. It was a daisy vlogging kind of month. I don't think I actually hit every day. I know it was like the 11th or the 12th or something. I missed an upload, but I think that was the only time. And then there are 4 sprints because we do sprints over there as well. So if I wasn't doing a daily vlog or a daily check-in, that's over there. I know I discussed 2 book to movie adaptations, partially because the strike is going on, so I didn't know if I could put that up over here. So I did discuss Red, White, and Royal Blue, so if you wanted to know my thoughts on that, that's over there, along with a kind of like reread moment that I was doing. So that's over there. And then Love in Taipei, which is an adaptation of Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen. That's on Paramount Plus, and I talked about that over there as well. So that's over there. And then just because it's been following, I think since the last time I was daily vlogging, we also got into like other TV things. So Real Housewives of New York, I talked about over there for a little bit. And then this season of Project Runway All-Stars. So lots of content over there. Some of it's better than others, but it's living over there if you wanted to know my in-depth thoughts for the actual things I read in the month of August. Obviously, in the month of July, I did my Christmas video, so I'm not going to talk too much about those things here because there's a whole reading vlog. My thoughts are in there. That'll be linked up in the cards. So first up in the month of July, I finished When You Wish Upon a Lantern by Gloria Chow. This was kind of the perfect time to read this. I started listening to this audiobook at the end of June. I was trying to finish it and I just couldn't get it in. And so here we're following these 2 families who share an alley. They used to be kind of friendly, but like not so much anymore. And there's a miscommunication at the center. So the 2 children of this family, whose names I have already forgotten. So let me open up the page here. Leah and Kai. So Leah's family has like it's kind of like a trinket shop, but there's like a general store, like a nice little bodega moment. And then Kai's family has a bakery. And so they're teaming up to spread love around the neighborhood. It's kind of a family tradition that Leah had going on with her family, her grandmother more specifically, who has now passed on. And so Kai is helping her redo this, spark the thing or whatever. Both of them have like a mutual attraction to one another, but there was a miscommunication that I thought made sense. And they're children, so like, of course, children are going to miscommunicate. And it was a cute time. I definitely enjoyed it. I wound up giving that book 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Blood Mercy, another book that I started in the month of June and finished in the month of July. And I gave this book 2 stars. It's not bad. It's definitely enjoyable. Somebody had requested it at my library because I don't think I did. And so this is it's pitched as like a fantasy romance for the girlies who like a plot in their book. And I like a plot. And while the take on vampires was interesting, overall, the book was just kind of there. It just kind of existed. It was just fine for me. And I wanted something more than fine because you were telling me there was a plot. And honestly, this book was like 600 some odd pages, maybe 500 some odd pages. It didn't need to be that long because the plot that was there was very flimsy. And now, like a month later, 2 months later, it's evaporated. The Heat of Christmas, a Stonewall Investigation holiday short is smutty. It's a smutty holiday story, holiday party story where we're following this couple as it's a game of like assassin essentially. And they're figuring out who the killer is because it's a holiday party. It's like a murder mystery, but like it's not a real murder. Like no one's actually dead. And so it was a fun time. It was smutty. It was probably the best thing I read in that Christmas video. Always in December by Emily Stone. This is also in the Christmas video, and it was one of the worst things I've read all year. It's also not a romance, so just know that. Then Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This was Aaron and I's July buddy read. This is about a man who is a physicist, I want to say, and he's married and he has a kid. And one day he finds himself abducted and separated from his family. And so this is a sci-fi thriller about this physicist trying to get back to his wife and children. And while I do think that the narrative made sense in terms of the world that we were in and the rules that were established early on, essentially, when we got to the end of the book, I thought it was just a little bit foolish. It was just a little bit too unserious for me. And while I understood that it made sense and it was logical and like it wasn't coming out of left field, I just didn't enjoy it. I did not like where the book went. I didn't feel satisfied at any point, and I wasn't really entertained. There's a point in the middle that just our main character, our scientist man, he's teamed up with somebody, and it's just I wanted to be able to do what she did, and I couldn't do it. Also, there was a point in this where it was even before that. I know y'all really love dark matter, and I get it. I can understand like how somebody could read that and enjoy it, but it just was not for me. And then I read Lore Olympus Volume 4 by Rachel Smythe. I just enjoy the series. It's very much a comic book, so it's very much very incremental storytelling. It's not a whole lot going on here, but I like the art. I had a good time. Lovelight Farms, B.K. Borison. This has been traditionally published now. I think it got picked up at Macmillan, and Macmillan... Here's the thing. I understand that everybody is out here trying to snap up the hot KU girlies and give them traditional money. And good on the KU girlies. Get your check. Love that for you. But Lovelight Farms was not good at all. And we get into it in my Christmas reading vlog. Next, I read something a little spooky-ooky. Trying to balance all the Christmas in my life, I suppose. I also think this book is out in the near future. I want to say like next week, maybe. Yeah, September 12th. So you guys should be able to pick this up for yourselves pretty soon. And I read Your Lonely Nights Are Over by Adam Sass. This is a story set, I want to say, in Arizona. I think it was giving Arizona vibes. Is it going to tell me Stone? Doesn't say. Anyway, here we are following besties Deary and Cole. And so Deary and Cole, at the beginning of the book, are kind of brought into the queer club because the queer club thinks that they did something that maybe they did or did not do. And at this meeting, spoiler alert, people start dying. And I have to say that me and Adam Sass have not always gotten along. I gave his first book 5 out of 5 stars, Friend of Your Sons, easily one of the best books I've read, just in general in YA. Then he pivoted and did like a fun, lighthearted, contemporary, romancy kind of book, The 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers, which I was not the biggest fan of. Like, it was still fun. It was fine. It wasn't what I personally wanted from a book, so I gave it like 3 stars maybe. But here, Your Lonely Nights Are Over. We were back in the dark, in the spooky Yuki. And so we're watching Deary and Cole as they and the rest of the queer club are trying not to die. Like, I was a little bit gooped and gagged at how many kids were dying in this book, like how far Adam Sass was able to go in a YA book. I definitely did not expect a full Scream experience. Like, more people died in this book than in some adult slashers that I've read, which isn't very many, but more people died in Your Lonely Nights Are Over than died in both Final Girls and Final Girl Support Group, which are billed to the girlies as a slasher. So step it up, men, step it up. Get on get on Adam's level here. I had a really good time with this one. I liked Deary and Cole's friendship. I liked how real and raw they felt. And I liked how they related to the rest of the queer club. And I liked seeing who was behind the murders and how they were using this like Netflix sensation in this like old case from miles and miles away to kind of like perpetrate their crimes. It was a good time. Then I listened to Family Lore, which I did include I read this on Patreon. I know I included this in a like exclusive reading vlog over there. So I do have thoughts and opinions. Me and Elizabeth Acevedo are not the biggest fan. Like, we're not the biggest. Like, I don't always love everything. In fact, I went into this expecting it to be a little bit better just because I do like her book. What is it? The cooking one with the Fire on High. I thought that With the Fire on High was like really good. And I was a little bit gagged because, you know, she's more well known, I think, for her books, Clapping You Land and The Poetics, because they're told in verse. And so I was excited by Family Lore because it was also just a regular prose novel. And it just didn't work for me. Like, I understand that, you know, island heritage and like magic being like a real part of people's lives and like this is like a thing. But it was a little bit unserious. It just... I don't know. Like the family didn't like did never it never came together for me. I wasn't super invested. I don't really feel like the book knew where it was going. It just kind of existed. And so I gave it 2 stars. I'm sure other people are really going to love it. But for me, it was a swing and a miss. And sorry. Then I switched up and I went on a like run of nonfiction. And low key, I'm still on like a little nonfiction kick. Like I just can't seem to get enough of it. But what started this off was Shielded, How the Police Became Untouchable by Joanna Schwartz. I want to say that Joanna Schwartz was a guest on Strict Scrutiny at some point earlier this year, like when this book came out. She was a guest on the show. And so that's how it came on my radar. And so this is a look at how the police not really came to function in terms of like everyday society, but the legal mechanics of like who can sue the police, why can't you sue the police, and who is, that kind of a thing. And it was a really interesting book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I had a wonderful time. The audiobook is excellent. I listened to it in the course of a day. So it was like really digestible, really easy to get through. And I think a really comprehensive look at the police and why they operate the way that they do and how they're able to do that. So I know that it's like a dry topic, but I do think that people should read it. Then I switched it up a little bit, and I did not rate this next nonfiction because I didn't really love it, but it's not bad. I listened to Dopesick, so Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America, which is similar, I think, to the other book about the opioid epidemic, about the Sackler family. I think it was the Patrick guy. Patrick Radden Keefe. He wrote a book about the Sackler family that everyone read a couple years ago. And I read Dopesick, which will later went on to be a show on Hulu with, what's his name? Will Poulter. Will Poulter was on that show. Anyway, so this was about the drug epidemic. It really focused on this area in rural Virginia, like Appalachia, the kind of like towns that were the warning signs of the opioid epidemic, and how they were trying to warn, not really warn, but how the alarms are going off like literally as soon as Purdue Pharma put the drug out onto the streets. Like there were doctors out here saying, hey, what is going on? So that's really what this book focused on. And I think that overall, like, it was fine. It was good. I think that it did what it wanted to do, but I just was personally left a little bit wanting. The next 2 books I gave 4 to 5 stars to, and they were Apprentice for Christmas and Duke Actually, both by Jenny Holiday. Again, I talk about this in the Christmas video. I just really liked the characters, liked the world. I liked what Jenny Holiday was able to do with these characters in this little world. I've yet to finish out this trilogy. I probably will read that one closer to Christmas at this point. I really wanted to get into it right in August, but it didn't shake out that way. But those were 2 books that I think that definitely were worth the hype, and I feel like I see them every Christmas, and you guys should definitely pick them up. The last book I read in July was Kiss Her Once for Me by Allison Cochran, and this book was just bad. It was horrible. We get into it in the Christmas vlog, so I won't get into it here, but it's worth nobody's time. It's horrible. Then in August, I was listening to Justice on the Brink, a Requiem for the Supreme Court by Linda Greenhouse, all through the month of July, because again, we had that earlier stint at the beginning of the month where I listened to Shielded and then Dopesick. And so I had Justice on the Brink checked out, but I didn't finish it until the very beginning of August. This, I believe, is an audiobook of the paperback copy that came out, because I want to say there's another edition of Justice on the Brink that was written before Amy Coney Barrett joined the court. And so this is like looking back at like kind of how Amy Coney Barrett and her being on the court shaped things. Again, it was a book that I didn't super love. It's not one that I was super invested in. And so I didn't wind up reading this one either. I think it is worth people's time. And I think that it is worth, what is the word I'm looking for? It's a perspective that's worth reading, particularly for someone like me who just enjoys legal nonfiction, which I do, which is kind of why I appreciated Shielded, because it was so much more legal focused. And so I liked Justice on the Brink, but it's just not everything I ever could have hoped and wanted. Our first buddy read in the month of July, when I say our first, it's me and Aaron again, because every month apparently we're doing this thing. And we read Lone Women by Victor Laval. This book was not very good. Here we're following our main character. I want to say her name is Adelaide, as she leaves. At the beginning of the book, she leaves California. Her parents are dead. We don't know exactly why they're dead, how they died. We know that she's saying goodbye to them and moving off to Montana. Now, Adelaide has had a special connection with the state of Montana because they share a birthday. So Montana became the state on her birthday like 6 years after Adelaide was born. And at this point, the state of Montana and the U.S. government have this deal where if you go to Montana and you set up a homestead and you're there, then congratulations, the land is yours, free and clear, you're good to go. And so we see her traveling to Montana with this mysterious chest. We don't know what's in the chest. We know she has it. And she is traveling. She eventually links up with this family. And so we're seeing Adelaide in the state of Montana, kind of like the only Black person around. As mysterious happenings go on, we see her experiencing life there. It's billed as a horror book, and I just feel like this book was not horrific. I mean, bad things happen. There are definitely things that go bump in the night. Like, I'm not saying that it's not horror at all. Like, I'm not going to be like, this wasn't a horror book, but to me, just it didn't hit what I particularly look for. And I don't feel like it was well written either. It was very bland. It was very boring. It was very, if I hadn't been reading with Aaron, I probably would not have finished this book. Like, I, in good conscience, cannot tell you to go out and read this particular book. I've seen people say that Victor Laval's other books are better. When I was talking about this on Instagram, I got a lot of people talking about how they appreciated this short story or that novella or this book. But I think Lone Women is a skip. I don't think this is a very strong outing from the good Dr. Professor. Then in the month of August, the patrons voted for me to read The Will of the Many, which is the first book in the Hierarchy series by James Islington. I had actually been anticipating this book. This is not a book that I think people associate with me, but this book is not very good. I think that it was poorly written, it was poorly executed, the characters were bland, the story, like the world itself, was boring. The first several hundred pages of this book do not need to exist. So here we are following Vis Telemus. That's not really his name, but we're going to call him Vis. So we're following Vis, who at the beginning of the book is working at a prison. He is an orphan. He's living in an orphanage. And one day, this high person decides to visit the prison and speak to a prisoner. And this kind of kicks off a situation where we see Viz get adopted and taken off to this elite training academy. And you would think that because we're at this academy and this has a very unique magical system, that we are going to be able to understand the world. And I don't really feel like that ever happens. We don't really get to see anything happening at this academy. Everything comes to Viz super easy. There is absolutely no struggle. For the girlies who are complaining about Fourth Wing, I feel like Fourth Wing had a better executed world, better executed, like we could understand the bounds of what people could do. The magic system was actually explained. Like the academy, they were doing academy things. Here at the academy, in the hierarchy, ain't shit happening. Nothing is happening at all. And so it's really hard for me to recommend this series overall, because I don't think The Will of the Many is a very good book. I don't think the characters were executed well. The last 2/3 of the book is a mad dash to like cram in a bunch of bullshit that I don't really feel like needed to be crammed in, that we had been talking about for a while. It's not worth it to me. It's not worth it. I don't think anyone should read it. If you do want to read it, I say wait. Wait until the series is out and you can binge it, because I don't think this is a series that particularly works well in installments. Sometimes you can. Like sometimes you can, dip into a series, read the first book, wait a year, read the second book, wait a couple years, read the third book. I don't think this is that kind of a series. Whatever is happening in this world, I feel like should have just been like one massive book. It didn't need to be split up the way that it did, because James Islington is not good at pacing. Like if even if you enjoy this book, I think that it is poorly paced and some editing could have fixed at least that issue. Next, I listened to Happy Place by Emily Henry, which I gave 2 stars to. Mind you, I want to say that most of my August reading is not going to make sense, and I feel like I need to disclaim that in the month of August, I attempted to participate in the Amazing Readathon. Halfway through the month, I just gave up because I just found the readathon was getting on my nerves. It was getting on my nerves. I wasn't having a good time. It was too complicated for my boring ass. Like when I'm doing a readathon, I just want to be less involved, I think. And it was a little bit too involved for me. It was a little bit too complicated for me. And I had to leave it behind. So at this point, I was still attempting to be in the readathon mode. And so one of the prompts was to read a book with like more than 3 people on the cover. Happy Place has like a ton of people on the cover. So I was listening to Happy Place. It was also a Libro ALC pick at some point this year. So I had it for free. I said, why not? This is the second Emily Henry book that I've read, and I do want to say that People We Meet on Vacation is definitely worse than Happy Place. Like, Happy Place is definitely the better book, but I don't recommend either one of them. Here we're following, what is her name? Is something Harriet? Is that Harriet in this one? Or is Harriet? Yes, Harriet and Wynn. So Harriet and Wynn are college sweethearts, and they and their friend group have been going to one of the friends' cabin in Maine. I think it's in Maine. Maybe it's not in Maine, but it's in the northeast. And so they've been going to this cabin every year for a really long time. But this year, Harriet and Wynn broke up. So Harriet and Wynn broke up in, like, let's say February, and now it is the summertime. So several months have passed since they've broken up, and summertime's coming around, and Harriet and Wynn have already established that, this year Harriet gets to go on the vacation, and next year Wynn will go, and Harriet will come up with an excuse not to be there. But lo and behold, when Harriet arrives at the cabin, who is there but Wynn? And so now her and Wynn are faking as though they never broke up because they don't want their friends to think that things are bad, that things are good, that everything is just like it used to be. And so we're seeing Harriet and Wynn going through the motions, pretending to still be together, while we're simultaneously understanding how they got together initially, which was also in secret that they were trying to keep from their friends. And then we are also in the present, while they're fake dating, seeing that there's still tension in the friend group. And I just want to say that the last act of this book, where the secrets come to light and everything is being revealed to everybody and everyone's getting on the same page about everything that's been happening all summer, it was just a little bit too unserious for me. It was a little bit too unserious for me personally. And while their friend might have been in the wrong for what they were doing technically, and morally I'm supposed to object to it, I do feel like this person told you who they were. They told you they were going to do something like this. And so when everybody was mad at this girl, I said, why are you mad? If someone tells you that I'm going to do this if you do that, and then they do this, and then you guys do that and they do this, why are you upset? Like, they literally told you, if you do X, I'm going to do Y. And then y'all go and do X and want to get upset when they do Y. Like, y'all are fucking stupid. I also just thought it was really dumb that these people who got together in secret, Harriet and Wynn, would then, these friends just didn't feel like friends to me. Like, that's really what it boiled down to. At the end of the day, it felt like a group of people that had no business really being friends, and they were going to be friends. Then, let's just be honest here. And also, because it's fucking Emily Henry, we only ever get Harriet's perspective. And I'm sorry, but she's not interesting. She's just the most boring character to be in the head of. I will say that she bathed. She was an enthusiastic bather, so I love her for that, particularly when Poppy was not bathing. So for me, it was a step up. But otherwise, it just was not very good. I don't really recommend it. Like, if you wanted to read an Emily Henry, it's definitely not the worst, I don't think, at least of the two that I've read. And I would certainly recommend it before people we meet on vacation. But overall, I just feel like it was a little bit too messy, particularly with the tension that was happening in the present storyline, because I just feel like there was option for the tension to be where it should have been, and not in this third party, essentially. It was there to make you invested in the friend group, but it just wasn't working. I'm sorry, it didn't work. Then I reread Red, White, and Royal Blue for the first time since the book came out. The first time I read that, it was as an arc. And so I was like, ooh, I'm going to read the book. I'm going to watch the movie. I'm going to make a vlog about it. Like I said, that really just lives over on Patreon, where I talk about that movie. And I included some of my vlog footage, I believe, and some daily vlogs that I was doing. And it's still a 5-star read. That book is just so good. I'm sorry. I don't care that it's 450 pages or almost 500 pages, however long that book is. I just think it's excellent. It's excellent. It's chef's kiss. I love Alex. I love Henry. I love their little moments together. I love the emails. I love the text conversations. I love the phone calls. I love the character development. This is another single perspective romance, kind of like Happy Place, but I do feel as though we understand Henry's perspective. We get to see his insight on things. He still feels like a full character, unlike other love interests in a single perspective romance. So I know the girls don't love that book, but for me, it still eats. I'm sorry. I can't deny that. Then I read One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. This was Aaron and I's second buddy read of the month. We're being a little bit ambitious. I actually bought this book, and I gave this book 2 stars. Here's the thing. I think this should have been a novella. I don't think that Olivia Blake, the narrative just couldn't do it. It couldn't do it. It was a Romeo and Juliet retelling wherein we had multiple Romeos, multiple Juliets, too many storylines happening. And this is the biggest problem that I had. And it's also the problem that I have with the Davenports earlier in the year, where we have so many characters hitting the same beats at the same time that it's just not entertaining to me. Too many characters are doing the same. Every character in the book had the same exact motivation. Every character in the book was doing the same things for the same reasons. And it's just there's too many of you. There's 14 characters and you all want to do the same thing for the exact same reason. Then we had people who were dying, and maybe they weren't dying, and then like they were dying again, and maybe they didn't die that time, but they died this time. It was just too much. It was doing too much. It should have been a novella. It could have been good, but it wasn't. And so I gave that book 2 stars. Then I read The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. And honestly, between you and me, like I was telling the patrons last month, this book was eating. It was eating. This book is like 600 pages, I think. Everyone says that Mariana is the queen of slow burn. And in my head, every time I've heard someone talk about like a 600-page romance, part of me is like, I'm going to eat it up, because I am the person who was always advocating that a book should be minimum 420 pages. And so 600 pages, that's 200 more pages than I think we need. So I went into this, a little bit nervous, but also like this could eat, like this could be good. And I will say, for the first 90% of the book, I was having a wonderful time. I thought that Mariana Zapata was cooking. Okay. She was doing what needed to be done. I was like, the girls need me getting lessons from Mariana, because at first I was like, these are 2 characters that don't need to be together. What are their names? Me and these names kicking my ass. What is her name? Was it Vanessa? Vanessa and Aiden, right? That sounds right. So at first I was like, how are Vanessa and Aiden going to get together? Because Aiden was a grade A jackass. Like, it wasn't making any sense to me. Now, I will say that some of his behavior, I was like, this seems to be appropriate for a boss and employee relationship. Like, some of the things that Vanessa was upset about at the beginning of the book, I was like, girl, you're his employee, get over it. But eventually, when I got to see what the plot was, and I could see how they were going to get together and they were going to be in a romance, I said, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I also think that I have learned about myself. I love a sports romance. I love a sports romance because I liked the Farrah Roshan sports romance last year. And here, Aiden is another football player, and she is like the personal assistant turned, I'm not going to spoil it or whatever, but it's a sports romance. Like, sports is kind of involved. And I was eating it up. It felt very good to me. This is another single perspective romance, but it feels like we get Aiden's, like, I understand where Aiden's coming from as a character. And so she was cooking. And then we got to the sex scene, and it was giving assault. It was giving she is asleep. It is giving she was not awake. It was giving you couldn't wait until she was conscious. And so even though she woke up and she was into it and she was happy and she we didn't penetrate until she was awake. It just felt like, why can't we do the foreplay when she's awake? And so I just, in good consciousness, I couldn't rate it that highly, but I would read another Mariana Zapata. I would read another one because I was a little bit gooped and gagged about how much I was enjoying that book. I think All Roads Lead Here is coming out next year from Avon. And so if I get the audiobook to that, I'll read All Roads Lead Here. Then we took a downturn. So after The Wall of Winnipeg and Me, I said, let me read Starbringer by Tracy Wolff, because when this book came out, both Aaron and Monet sent me pictures of this book and Barnes & Noble. I think because I had just finished talking about Fourth Wing and how Tracy Wolff had sons, because Fourth Wing is nothing but, Crave Redux. And so I read it, and Starbringer is bad. Now, Starbringer does have a co-author. I think it's Nina Croft. So shout out to Nina Croft as well. I want to give you your dues. But this book is bad. This is a sci-fi romance. So we're in space. There are multiple characters. All of them have love interests, and all of them get these love interests immediately, which is par for the course for a Tracy Wolff novel. She did not waste any time in Crave, so I'm not surprised she didn't waste any time here. But here we have a problem, because in this book, the plot line kicks off. So we're on the space station, and the space station is attacked. On this space station that is attacked, they are trying to find a way to keep the star at the center of their galaxy from going supernova. We know the star is going to go supernova any decade now, and so they're trying to find a way. There's kind of a problem because there's a religious order in this galaxy that is like worshiping the sun, and they think that when the sun does go supernova, like it's going to, obviously it's going to kill people, but it's also going to like bring about something that's going to be a good situation for their religion. And so the people who are in this religion don't really want the sun to be saved. Everyone else is like, we would like the galaxy to still exist in its current form. There's also some politics in this that don't really entirely make sense. Like the government system in this doesn't entirely make sense. But eventually we start to follow this cast of like 8 characters who are on the ship that is attacked onto a secondary star vehicle that is low-key an alien spacecraft. and we just completely ignore the fact that the sun is going to go supernova at any point to focus on rescuing this character who is enslaved out in the what is the word I'm like asteroid belt at the fringes of this galaxy. This is a character we don't really understand who they are, what their importance is to the center, like to the rest of the story, for a lot of the story, to be honest with you. It's just a person that kind of exists we're supposed to care about. When we finally do understand like who this person is and how they play into the plot, it's a little bit foolishness. The third act is a lot of foolishness. There comes a point where we find out that maybe the sun is going to go supernova sooner than we previously thought, and characters should be making decisions with that in mind. And instead, we just kind of continue to ignore the fact that this star could explode at any minute in this story, and whatever else you're trying to do won't matter because the star is going to go supernova. And there is a cliffhanger. I don't think there's a second book listed on Goodreads, but there's no way this is not the start of a series, partly because it's Nina Croft and Tracy Wolff, who's both their bibliographies are at the beginning of the book, and both of them have extensive series. But with the way this book ends, there's no completion to the story. So clearly this is going to go on. I don't think that I'm personally going to continue on with it just because it's not very good. I do have a spoilery kind of discussion about Starbringer over on Patreon, so I won't spoil it here, but it's a lot. That book, there's so many twists and turns in that book. It's a little bit ridiculous. When I say a little bit ridiculous, I mean a lot of it ridiculous. Hi, it is Monty coming to you from editing with this horrible just overhead lighting. One second, actually, I can turn on my ring light. Hi, so it is me, it is Monty. I'm editing this video, and I realized that I completely skipped over Tremors in the Blood, which has a subtitle, so let me open up my page. One second. Murder, Obsession, and the Birth of the Lie Detector by Amit Katwala. This was a book that I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I listened to it at work one day, and I just completely omitted it from the discussion of books I read last month in August. This, as the title would suggest, is all about the birth of the lie detector. So it chronicles the myriad of men. It's like 3 or 4 individuals who at various stages were instrumental in the birth of creating this lie detecting machine. It talks about early policing, specifically in the great state of California. And so specifically in Northern California, and how from its inception, the lie detector was always sort of under fire. Like, some of the people who obviously wanted to invent this machine thought that if they could invent it, then, you know, like maybe we could just do away with jury trials altogether, because obviously if you had a machine that could detect when a person was lying, we wouldn't need a jury of our peers. And so that was like part of the motivation. But also, he was just completely fascinated with being able to derive a way to tell when people were lying. And so it starts off how it was being used at like this like very low stakes. There was like a series of robberies at Berkeley's all-female dorm. And so they had been tinkering and building this machine. And he said, well, why don't I use it? And so he used it, and he eventually elicited a confession from one of the women at this dorm, and they didn't go to jail or whatever. They just kind of signed this confession, and they agreed to like pay some restitution, I believe. And then this woman decided to go back to the great state of Kansas, and eventually she wrote to the man and said that like the machine had just like it wasn't working. Like, it didn't actually work. She just felt an immense amount of pressure. And it just, so from the very early days of the lie detector, there were these very clear indications that like it didn't work. And the book itself continues to chronicle how they continued to tinker and do these things, and how there were some best practices, so to speak, on the methodology, the sort of scenarios in which it should be used, how to know you were going to get a false positive, how easy it was to get a false positive, and how even the people who were wanting to be able to, you know, invent this thing to do away with jury trials, like one of the men like really did see the flaws in this invention. And so a lot of the book actually tracks 2 separate murder investigations and how the use of lie detector played out in those, and how obviously, you know, it's not admissible in a court of law, but how it's still sort of crucial to these 2 investigations, and how it being inadmissible didn't really stop in this one instance. So, in all honesty, I do think that Tremors in the Blood is a really good book. I think it's like I said, I listened to it over the course of a shift at work. I mean, I did listen at like 3 times speed. So like, I don't think everyone is going to listen to this, in like 1 8-hour day at work or whatever. But I do think that it's good to pass the time. And with Nonfiction November right around the corner, I would recommend this. There's been a lot, or there's going to be a couple more nonfiction books I'm going to talk about later on in this video. I've already talked about them because you're going to see Editing Monty again in like 5 or 6 books. And that Editing Monty was actually filmed before this Editing Monty. And he's going to talk about some more nonfiction. So there's a lot of nonfiction in this wrap up because I've been on a kick. I don't know what to tell you. I just enjoy audiobook nonfiction. And so this is definitely one that I recommend that you guys pick up. So that's why I interrupted. But I'm going to go now and give it back to Past Monty. And he's going to tell you about, I think a thriller. Okay. I don't think that the angle changed, but I was doing sprints with Aaron, and so I had to leave briefly, but I am back to talk about The Girls of Summer by Katie Bishop. This is a novel told in 2 timelines. So in the past, we are following our girl. I want to say her name is Rachel. I read this relatively recently, so you think I would remember her better than these other characters. Yes, Rachel. So we're following Rachel both as a freshly turned 18-year-old on summer vacation with her friend from school, and then her in the future, also on vacation, this time with her husband. So in the past timeline, we see Rachel going to Greece. I want to say she is... I'm gonna stick with Greece. So we see her on this like Greek island on vacation, living it up, getting lured. That's probably a better word than lulled. Getting lured into this man's orbit. This man is clearly older than her. There's some sexual assault happening in the story. There's some sex trafficking happening in the story. It's definitely giving adult. It's giving exactly what you think would give. And then in the present timeline where she's older on vacation with her husband, back on this Greek island, she is drawn back into the other girls that she knew on this island, and they kind of pull her into this like Me Too era. We're here to take down this man who was a sex trafficker, and she's not really into that idea. Instead, she starts sleeping with her sex trafficker again in the present, like having an affair on her husband with the sex trafficker. It was just weird. And then the actual commentary that happened in this book just felt a little vanilla, a very been here, read that in other stories already, particularly in books that came out prior to 2023. And so reading a book like this in 2023 that doesn't offer anything new to the table, it was giving, why are we here? What was the point of all of this? And so I didn't really enjoy this book, and I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars because it's not a horrible book. It's well written. It's competent. I will say that the ending is a little bit rushed because it does kind of like shift gears pretty abruptly from this I'm having an affair with my sex trafficker to there's like this legal aspect that comes into the story. And overall, it's just not really the moment. Then I read The Unfortunates by J.K. Chukwu. This book I just happened to see at the library, and I was like, this looks interesting. I might like this. And the synopsis told me it's going to be about a Black woman at a university, and other Black people are starting to disappear. And so she is writing a thesis, or she's investigating like why these Black people are disappearing. I went up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. I will say the audiobook of this is excellent. The narrator was really able to imbibe a vibe and a feeling and emotion into the text. It was really well done. But I will also say that the actual like text of the book is like multimedia. So while the premise of the book that's set up at the beginning is this is the character's thesis, so she's writing to her thesis advisory board of people who are supposed to like grade this paper. So she's writing to them, but included are like tests and playlists and like some other things that are in there. And so I do think that it's interesting. And so the book itself chronicles our protagonist's sophomore year at this institution, and her writing this paper. the way that this book ends, I think immediately recontextualizes everything that's happened in the book. And so I do think that it's the kind of a book where you finish it and you want to read it over. And that's kind of why I wound up giving it 3 stars. Because I think this is a book that is 3 stars because I went into it with one set of expectations. And so I read it with that set of expectations. And when the book wasn't quite that and it became something different, I was like, well, this isn't very good. And then I got to the end of the book and I could see what the author was doing. But at that point, my vision had already been clouded. And so I do think that I would read this book again to see if it would raise up, because I think this could go to a 4, because now that I know what is happening and I understand it better and I'm able to see what the author was intending to do, I appreciate it a little bit more than when I went into it. Because, I went in with a certain set of expectations and the blurb led me to believe some things were going to happen. I did expect it. And in some ways, I will say that this is kind of like every other book that you read about a Black person at a predominantly white institution of higher learning and the things that they're going through. It is set in the mid 2000s, like from 2008 to 2013 kind of an era. It's kind of nebulous, but either way, and that just felt like kind of a gimmicky kind of a thing to allow some of the plot elements to play out and for some of the commentary to exist and not feel like been there, done that. I think that part of the problem with The Girls of Summer is that while part of it's set in the past, but part of it's also set in like the very present. Like both of the books, The Girls of Summer and The Unfortunates, I think play with commentary that is a little bit, again, been there, read that, but I appreciate a little bit more The Unfortunates, even though I do think that part of the reason that it's acceptable is that it does purposefully try and set itself outside of where we are as a society now, and to read this as a character then having those thoughts and remembering that those characters having that thought in that time is not maybe as culturally predominant as it is today. So I appreciated it. Then for the end of the month, I went on a string of let's just read nonfiction. I'm going to include those 2 books here, even though one of them I technically finished in September. So first, I read Billion Dollar Loser, The Epic Rise and Spectacular Fall of Adam Newman in WeWork. I recently renewed my Apple TV Plus subscription because the morning show is coming back. I feel like we have just been going in and out with the lighting this entire video, and I don't really appreciate it. So I'm apologizing in advance if it's been a little bit dark. But I started watching We Crashed with Jared Leto and Anne Hathaway. It's one of Anne Hathaway's best performances, and the fact that she didn't get nothing for it, gagged. Anyway, so I started watching that, and I said, you know what, there has to be a book about this, because of course there's a book about it. And so there was a couple that I had to choose from, and ultimately I decided with Billion Dollar Loser. And I have to say that my issue with this book, while I did give it 4 to 5 stars, the reason that I had it dock a star is I don't think that it tells a particularly linear story, and I don't think that it ever really chronicles the epic rise or the fall, or spectacular fall, because it's not chronological. Like there is no build up. Every time we're at the beginning of the story, the author Reeves Weidman is telling us what's going to happen later, and so there isn't a sense of anticipation. There isn't a sense of building to something. It just kind of this happened, and this would eventually bite everybody in the ass. And so while we do see the rise and the fall, it never feels like a rise, and it definitely doesn't feel like a fall. It just kind of feels like it was there and then it wasn't. It's very it blipped. And so I don't think there is a particularly novel approach to this, which is kind of sad. I do believe that this is something that was originally a piece in the New Yorker or a Vanity Fair, or it's a feature article that bloomed into a book. And I think that's part of the reason why it doesn't feel that great. I think that maybe in their initial article where they did this piece on WeWork, it was better, but as a book, it just kind of fell flat. But Will Collier, who was an audiobook narrator that I ran with after listening to this, he really heightened the story and was able to breathe life into something that I thought was a little bit dull. And then the last book that I read in the month of August, again, technically I finished this September. I'm going to talk about it here anyway. And that was Billion Dollar Whale, The Man Who Fooled Wall Street, Hollywood, and the World by Tom Wright and Bradley Hope. This is about a Malaysian man who came from kind of a wealthy family who was able to steal $5 billion. And I just have to say, again, this is another thing. I read all of these things on Patreon in the month of August, but this one in particular just kind of gagged me the most. Because again, this is a man who stole $5 billion from a fund that he was able to set up, and through a series of cash transactions and business deals and this and that and the third, again, stole $5 billion. This is a man so he starts this investment fund for the country of Malaysia. Like, this is all public money, and he raises $1 billion. He calls in a friend from Saudi Arabia who's like a low-down prince who has a petrochemical company, and he's like, we should do this. Like, you're going to invest, and we're going to do this business deal. He gets $1 billion. Good for him. He has $1 billion sitting in this account. This man, his first day, siphons $700 million out for himself. And $700 million, I'm sorry, that's enough. Like, that is more than enough. But he would go on to create the most circuitous money transfer, shoddy business deals, no business acumen having. The best thing this man did was finance the Wolf of Wall Street. And spoiler alert, because of all of his fraudulent activities, all the future revenue from that movie has been seized by the United States government. So this is definitely a book that I think people should read. I think if you do read this, you, like me, are going to hate bankers. I walked away from this book. I don't fuck with a banker. The investment bankers all knew something shoddy was happening. They all knew something was up. They all knew the milk wasn't clean, and they was mixing and matching because they was getting the bonuses. So this was a story that did have, I think, like a rise and a fall and like building action, and like you couldn't. It was worth every minute that I spent listening. So $1 billion whale, this man, he did some shit, and I think you guys should read it. So what is up? It is Monty. I'm going to call it Editing Monty, even though between you and I've not actually started editing this video, but I'm going to say it's Editing Monty because my plan for today was to edit my Patreon vlog, and I did that. So if you want a September reading vlog where I'm going to tell you about some of the same things I'm about to tell you about now, just a little bit more in depth and in the moment, you can head down to the description and click the link there. But because tomorrow is the 15th, right? Yes, today's the 14th. Tomorrow, Friday's the 15th. A mid-month wrap-up feels appropriate. And so releasing this as a mid-month wrap-up feels a little bit more commonsensical because I've waited so long. And if I'm going to release it as a mid-month wrap-up, I should probably briefly mention the things that I've read in the month of September. So I'm briefly trying to get over to my Goodreads so I can remember and refresh my memory. It hasn't been too many things since the last time that I was talking about this. I'm pretty sure I included The Good Nurse, A True Story of Medicine, Madness, and Murder by Charles Graeber in the video already. But in case I did not wind up writing that book on Goodreads just because I don't know. Like, there was something about this man. It just really unsettled me. There's something about a person who was just like murdering so indiscriminately and has like no actual clue the number of people that they did murdered. I don't know why I'm struggling to like find the word there, but it was just like really unsettling to me. But the book itself, I thought, was a little bit, it felt like it was hemming and hawing a little bit too much for my liking. There were parts of the narrative where it felt like Charles Graeber was like, well, you know, he was abused as a child, and so he had no choice. He had no choice but to become a murderer. And I had to push back. I had to push back on that because I don't buy that narrative. I'm sorry. Like, it's not for me. It's not something he's trying to sell it. I'm not purchasing. And I also felt that if you were going to go down that road and discuss his, life as a child and the way that he had been abused and how his military service impacted him, then I feel like he really needed to go in and actually examine that. But Charles Graeber doesn't do that. And so just seeing this nurse killing all these people and the fact that the hospital... I said this in the vlog that went up today for the patrons, but in so much of the recent nonfiction that I've read, it was me going back to them saying, you guys, we have a new circle of hell. Who was it? Dante, who only had 9. There's at least 13 circles of hell now, thanks to me and all the nonfiction that I've been reading recently. And there's definitely a circle of hell for the hospital administrators who kept employing this man. And so, like I said, you can go listen to all that on my Patreon. The first book I actually read in the month of September, and there's only been 3. It's not been a very good reading month for me. Was Come and Get It by Kylie Reed. This is out in January, I believe. I was able to get an ARC, and I read it early. And on Goodreads, I was very kind, and I gave it 4 stars. But between you and me, what I told the patrons, it's really like a 3.5. My issue with this book is I enjoyed it. while I was reading it. But when I finished it and I was looking back on it, I don't want to say that it felt empty, but I felt like it didn't quite go where I wanted it to go, which isn't necessarily fair. But I don't think that it really examined the narrative in the way that I wanted it to, or I felt like it was setting itself up to do. There are people on Goodreads who say the book is plotless. I don't agree with those people. I think that clearly reading comprehension is lacking, which is another conversation we have on Patreon a lot. But I do think there was a very clear narrative that was set up and just kind of didn't go anywhere. And it set up a lot of these further conversations that also didn't really go anywhere. And I think that sometimes that's, fine. Specifically, I guess Kylie Reed, because her first book was a Reese pick. I think when you are writing a book, or I guess when you've written a book, there was a book club book. In your second book, you kind of have like this, I don't want to say assumption, but I understand like leaving things out of the narrative that you yourself are expressing so people can have conversations about it. But at the end of the day, I felt that the conversations around wealth and how these girls at this college related to wealth and their families and how they related to one another and the story that was unfolding and this professor that was coming in, it was a lot and it was entertaining in the moment. But once you had finished the book, there's not really any substance to stick with you. And that's kind of where I found the downfall of that book to be. So while I enjoyed it, it's not a book that I could, read it because I enjoyed it. But also, like, if you read it and you don't get anything out of it, I wouldn't be surprised. Then I read Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. And I'm going to blame this book for why my reading month has been shit, because this book is horrible. This book is not very good. Nobody told me that this was about a crackhead. It's about a crackhead. This someone wakes up and does, cocaine. She fucking Whitney Houston in this bitch. She wakes up and does her cocaine, and then she goes to work where she's bullied. She's a 33-year-old woman working at this tech startup, which love that for her. She had a previous career that she left to work at the startup, and that's not even, like, the book wants you to believe that is going to be about her job at the startup and the way that her boss kind of lures her into this illegal activity, which isn't necessarily true. Like, there's some prodding, but Cassie, she dives in fucking head first into the illegal activity. So, like, bitch, you up a creek without a paddle, and that's your own doing. And then what the book really becomes is our crackhead may or may not be pregnant with this doctor. I think it's doctor, with this man that she's seeing, who she comes to find out is not just seeing her. She finds out that he's in a committed relationship, and he's like telling his girlfriend that he might be polyamorous. And so she being the girlfriend is aware that Cassie exists and that he's dating around, but Cassie is just finding this out as she's thinking she's pregnant, and she doesn't really want to tell this man, and she doesn't really want to find out. And so much of the book is about her maybe depression. It's like this black hole allegory that I think is half baked and doesn't really go anywhere and doesn't really work out. And then the other half is about this pregnancy and her doing crack and slurping oysters and getting wasted. And it's just like, Rose Etter was all over the place. And sorry, girl, but you wrote a horrible book. Easily one of the top 10 worst books of the year. We'll be revisiting it in December. The cover is stunning. The cover is gorgeous. It is not worth the price of admission. Then I read Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI, and I gave that book 4 out of 5 stars. Listen, I was telling y'all just a second ago that every time I read a nonfiction, I found a new circle of hell. Now, I don't know if the circle of hell I discovered this time was all that new, because I feel like we all been new some of the things, but I also learned a lot. I learned a lot, not only about the Osage people and their history and how they got to Oklahoma, through their course of events that led them there, and how they had originally been on, large swaths of the plains. And so we get a truncated view of that in the first section of the book. And then the middle section of the book is actually about this murdering that was happening in the 1920s. And then the third part of the book is how the murders of the Osage people was a little bit more expansive than originally thought, but originally investigated, and the ways that investigation was not perfect, and how the FBI, the middle part of the book also talks about the expansion of the FBI and policing in America, which is a little bit interesting because earlier in, I think it was like August and in June, I read Tremors in the Blood and Shielded, which also talked about the history of the police. So like, it was another one of those nonfiction moments where, pieces were, being brought together, and it was interesting in that regard, but also I think the weakest part of the book. And then the third part of the book also goes back to the Osage and talks to them current day. I say current day, this book came out in like 2017, I want to say. And so the author or this person was talking to the Osage around the time this book was coming out. So it was contemporaneous to the publication of the book. And it was talking about how the murders still impacted the people today and how it had rippling effects and a lot of things. It being the book also touches on the United States government and policies that were policies that were in place that impacted the way that these murders occurred and how they were investigated and how the bag was fumbled multiple times in multiple ways, and really exacerbated why this even occurred in the first place. So lots of information was had. It was entertaining. Feels bad to say when we're talking about like the murder and oppression and just exploitation of the Osage people, but it was engrossing, and so I did learn a lot. It was educational, and I understand why Martin Scorsese I can't say this man's name. I understand why Scorsese would want to make a movie out of this. And I did see the trailer. I talked about this in, I think, my Goodreads review and maybe a little bit on Patreon. Like, I initially read Killers of the Flower Moon because I understood that it was going to be made into a movie. And so, like, I put it on my holds list and the hold came in. But having seen the trailer, I don't think I could watch the movie. I've seen him, I read one interview at this point where he said he revisited the script and he reworked it a bit because his first draft or whatever didn't really center the Osage. It was more on the FBI person who came in, I think it was White, Jack White, John White, something White maybe, how he came in and it was like an outsider's perspective. And in this second draft of the film, it's more centers the Osage people and even the person who's playing Molly, who's at the center of the successful, I guess I'll say, the successful investigation in Killers of the Flower Moon. The actress who's playing Molly is like, yeah, the first time I got, the script or whatever, it was just a lot of dialogue and there wasn't really anywhere for me to act. And then the second time I got the script and it worked, like there was more to it. So I do believe that he has centered them, but the trailer definitely does not. And I feel like the trailer is very it really wants me to feel bad for Leonardo DiCaprio's character. And let me just say, that man deserves absolutely no sympathy. I do not feel bad for that man at all. I don't think he's a complex figure. I think it's very black and white that he's a horrible person. Maybe not quite as horrible as De Niro's character in the film, who definitely, he's in his own fucking circle of hell. But I don't think I could watch the movie after seeing that trailer. So I don't think I'm going to watch the movie, but I am happy that I read this book. And going forward, I might look into other stories involving the Osage and their history that maybe don't center this super tragic event, but I'm happy now to have been enlightened a little bit about it. So that's been Editing Monty, filling you in on the September books that I've read. I did also start Mr. Magic. I'm currently buddy reading that with Erin, but I don't think she started it yet, so I haven't finished it. But I've told her once already on Patreon that that's my next pick. I'm picking up the book, and now I'm telling the public I'm going to be reading that next. So I'll be able to tell you guys about that at the end of the month if I can get my stuff together and film a wrap up on time. But Mr. Magic, I have started, and it's going good so far. Read about half of it. It's a good time so far. So I've started that, haven't finished it. But that's all I got for you guys. So thanks for tuning in. If you've made it into the video, you're the real one. And I'll see you guys again soon. Hopefully, fingers crossed. If you want to see me again soon, I definitely will be daily vlogging on Patreon in the month of October. So I can guarantee videos will get produced. I just don't know if they'll be over here for public consumption. But I'll see you guys again soon-ish, maybe, fingers crossed, in another video. But until then, and until next time, bye.